Well, I feel this is a nice, comfortable group, and that's fun. Hello, everybody. My name is Kristal Dove, and I am glad that you guys are in here. And I would love for us to start with prayer first, and then we'll get rolling on this launching students into adulthood. So let's pray. Father God, thank you for today. And Lord, I just thank you for the opportunity for us to get to have this time together. Lord, I thank you for this conference. And I just pray now that I believe that you have something for all of us today, and I pray that we would be just tuned into your spirit and your leading, and I pray, God, that we would walk away from this place just knowing you a bit more, and I also just pray that you would cultivate our hearts, Lord, for students, that you would work in our lives to just then care for those that you put within our care, Lord, and so just, work in us in that way today as well. I pray over this time together that you would just use it in a mighty way. We thank you for your love and for your grace and for Jesus, and it's in his name that we pray. Amen. Well, when I was first asked to lead this workshop, I said yes without hesitation. Over the last few years, the Lord has really opened my eyes to what I believe to be my vocational calling, which is working alongside college students as they enter into adulthood. But as we got closer to today, I think I started to feel a little bit ill-equipped to do this, because I knew that there would be a mix of folks in this room, and that there might be some parents in here. So how many parents, I would guess, are we parents, raise your hand if you're a parent.
Used to be.
Okay, used to be a parent. Well, and even, I'm not a parent, so I'm going to say that up front. And then are there those who work with young adults or with youth group students, or who are part of youth group in this room? See, I have not, done that for a long time either. I have been working with college students now for 4 years. So as I was thinking about it, I was like, okay, am I the right person for this? But then I realized, this is a great space for us to just kind of learn from one another. So I would invite you afterwards. We had a group after the last one, just kind of stay around and talking. Feel free to ask questions, or just come and chat, or email me, or whatever. Would love to talk to you guys further. Because I think for me, one of the things that I realize is that as the body of Christ, we are all in this together. And so we're all in this together, and that's what gives me the courage to sit up here in front of you guys today. Just kind of knowing that the reason that I do what I do is because that the power of Christ is working within me, and that he has given me a specific role to play in this body. And so that's why I didn't back out, because I thought about it. So that's the place that I'm going to speak from today. Now, how many of you all have heard of Frederick Buechner? Has anyone heard of Frederick Buechner? Okay, we've got a hand from behind the camera over here. So he has a great quote that those of you who've heard of him, and even those who haven't might have heard this quote before, about vocation. And it reads, "Vocation is the place where our deep gladness meets the world's deep need." Now, the majority of the time, I feel as though my vocation, which is being immersed in the daily life of college students, is the greatest gig on earth. I really honestly believe that. But, there is a great, that's my deep gladness is right there. But there's also a great deep need. Today's young adults have a desperate need to understand what it means to know and to love Christ, as well as to discover their meaning and their purpose. And so I wake up each day, or at least most days, with a great desire to walk alongside of my students during this oftentimes difficult journey of discovery. So part of why I share that is I want to take a few minutes and just kind of give you the context of which I'm speaking from. So kind of what I'm doing now, but how I got to where where I am today. I'm a firm believer that context matters, and so I just kind of want to share a piece of that so you know what it is that has driven me to share what's on my heart today. I, like most of us, have kind of lived a crazy vocational journey. I graduated from Milligan back in the 90s with a business degree and did that for a little while, and then I had kind of a short stint overseas as part of a master's program, and then I lived in the middle of the ocean for a little bit on a cruise ship, and for a little time longer than a cruise. And then I ended up spending 7 years in full-time parachurch and then church ministry. So that's kind of like what I was doing when 2008, 2009 hit. And I sensed that God was calling me to something different, to something, I don't want to use the word bigger, but just to a big life change. Well, I was living in Maryland, working for a church that I loved, and I had just bought my first house, and I was living near my family, and I kind of loved my life. So I was really excited about this new next big thing, but I just assumed it was still at the church. Like, I never thought it would be. I'd owned my house for like 6 months at this point. I was like, okay, so I'm just going to switch roles here at the church. And so the leadership of the church started praying with me, and we just started praying, and we came up with a couple of different job things, and we're like, no, that's not it. Everything sounded great, but no, that's not it. No, that's not it. And then in the summer of 2009, it quickly became clear to me that the Lord was calling me into something completely different, which was to work with college students and young adults. And I was the director of marketing and outreach, was what I was doing at that point at the church. So that was a really big, kind of out of left field is how I felt, change for me. However, those who knew me best kind of repeated the affirmation of that calling. And next thing I knew, like that, I was moving halfway across the country to Wheaton, Illinois, to go to Wheaton College to get my master's in Christian formation and ministry. I put my house on the market and, kind of took the step of faith. And so I was getting my master's in Christian formation, but concentrating in student development and higher ed. And while I was there, I had the privilege to work in residence life and in student development, which allowed me to quickly put into practice, as I was in the classroom, what I was learning in the classroom. And I can honestly say to you all, my life changed in a heartbeat when I made that shift. My coursework excited me beyond words. I got to be the TA for 2.5 years, a teacher's assistant for 2.5 years of the main college and young adult professor up there. And he was wonderful, and I soaked up everything that he taught me. But more than that, it was the way I was able to practically apply what was in the classroom, what I was able to get to do outside of the classroom, that really kind of lit a fire in me. There was many days where I asked the question, I actually get paid to do this. Like, it floored me that I actually got paid to do this. Because for me, there was something about living my students' stories alongside of them that made my heart beat. It was not always easy. I was a complete novice at this whole entering into people's psychological and emotional and spiritual needs on a daily basis thing. I often will tell people, residence life is an interesting thing because your door gets knocked on a lot when you live on campus with students. And you never know if the knock on the door is because they need a light bulb, or if they don't know why they're alive, and so you get the knock on the door. And I've had both happen at all hours of the day. And you get the knock on the door and you learn to just pray, okay, God, whatever's on that other side of that door, give me the strength to enter into this. So for me, part of why I loved what I got to do is that with every conversation, I fell more and more in love with my students, but I also grew more and more dependent on Jesus, because he was who was guiding me through and giving me the strength to be able to do this. God used my time at Wheaton to just teach me about my faith and that I needed to be depending on him. So that's me, and that's where I come from. And so today, I graduated in 2012, and today I'm working at Milligan, which is my favorite place in the world. And I got to come back in 2012 as a resident director, and now I'm teaching a little bit, but I'm serving as a resident director and also as the director of campus activities. And it's a wild, wild ride, but I love what I get to do. So the reason I share all of that with you is because I want you to be able to see the degree to which I love emerging adults. I love the group that we are talking about in here today. It's why I get up in the morning, because God has given me that passion. So know that everything that I want us to talk about today comes out of my heart to see God's kingdom come within the lives of young adults. So with that in mind, we'll kind of enter into some more practical stuff. Now, my colleagues and I often joke, I'm going to tell you a few stories about some students today. My colleagues and I often joke about how we could write a really riveting book, or I think there is still a sitcom or dramedy yet to be made about the daily life of living with college students. And so it's through these daily encounters that I've discovered what I believe to be three key areas. There's lots of key areas, but three key areas when it comes to helping students kind of take the next step on their journey. And that's identity formation, vocation and calling, and then the concept of mentoring. So the first area we're going to talk about is identity formation, which can be kind of obscure sort of thing. So let me ask you guys a question. When you hear the word identity formation, what do you think? I'm going to ask you first because I'm curious because you're grinning. What do you think, from your perspective, identity formation, what do you think about?
The forming of a new identity and finding out and figuring out who God made you to be.
Mm-hmm. That's a good answer. Finding out and figuring out who God made you to be, that's a good answer. It's a really good answer, actually, that lots of people don't say. What else? Identity formation.
You summed it up.
Yeah. Is it easy?
No.
No.
It sounds easy.
It sounds easy. It does. It can be, there are times when it can be, and there are times when it can be really confusing. I think it can be a complicated thing. Exactly. It can be a really complicated thing, especially for today's emerging adults. There is a book over here that I would recommend. I have this stack of books here. Please feel free to come look later. I reference a couple of them in this, but these are some that I really value. But there's a book over here, Spiritual Formation in Emerging Adulthood, and they talk about the game of life. Now, who of you all has played the game, like the original game of life? Okay, so we've played the game of life. I didn't play it much growing up because it was like with Monopoly and Risk for me, which was long and boring. But my memory of, and I know some people love those games, but for me, my memory of the game of life really though is the little pink and blue figures. Like that's kind of, exactly, boring, the little cars with the little pink and blue figures. Now, the game of life back then, the original version of the game of life, the big choice at the beginning of the game was between college and career, and then the path progressed naturally from there. So, you stop by the church, you get married, you have a pink or blue kid, you have a job, you buy a house, retire. That's the game of life. Now, in 2005, Life was re-released. Who has played the new version of Life? Anyone? Okay. The new version of Life, what I like about it, because it kind of depicts the change of time, there's a subtitle to the game, the new version of Life, which is Twists and Turns. And now you have 20 careers to choose from. You have something like 7 or 8 promotion options. And although marriage and having kids are definitely options, they're not kind of that integral part of the journey because it's all full of twists and turns and it's kind of chaotic, which part of why I share about that is I really think that's what today's students, that's the only life they've known, is this life where there's all these options and twists and turns and what makes me who I am. And that's the reality of the world that they're living in. And so as a result, things that used to really mark one's identity as an adult in our society, like leaving home, having a job, getting married, having kids, and a long-term career at the same place, no longer necessarily serve as the cultural definers that they used to. And oftentimes that leaves today's young adults confused as to who am I and what am I supposed to be doing with my life? And that I feel like is where we come in. And here's the thing. Now, here's some truth, and you might or might not buy into it, but you buy into this, and this makes me very happy. And I believe this at the core of my being, that those benchmarks, things like marriage and having kids, they're very important, and they very much shape who we are, but they're not what determines our identity. That, they're not our definers. God and God alone is the one who determines our identity. So my identity is not found in my marital status, and it's not found in the money that I make or the money that I don't make. It's found solely in what I believe about God and how I'm allowing God to shape my life. And I think that we have a great responsibility. I think that's really confusing for people at times and so it's essential for us to know what we're up against society-wise, and I think we have a great responsibility to help explain that to young adults, to students as they come along. I cannot tell you the number of times, and I have been this person when I was in college, that I've had a student, male and female alike, just crying in my home, shattered over a bad test grade, a breakup, the list is endless, but shattered because they don't know who they are now as a result of something going wrong. And so I think it's really important that our role is to speak into the lives of these individuals to help them understand the value of finding their identity in Christ. But at the same time, I think we also need to work hard to release them to discover that identity for themselves. So we need to help them see their value in finding their identity in Christ, but then release them to discover that identity. Now, when your kids, whether it be your children or your friends, or if you're a youth sponsor, the kids that you work with, when they first step out into adulthood, they're typically in what's called a state of foreclosure. So we're going to have I'm going to enter into developmental psych for like a minute and a half, so bear with me. But this helps me put things in a kind of a context. There's a guy named James Marcia, who we always called Marcia in grad school, who I thought was a female for a really long time until I actually saw his first name attached to him. So James Marcia is the one who kind of has established this concept. And foreclosure is that place where the understanding of identity is at the point where you're totally just adopting the belief system of the adults, of your parents or the other adults that influence you. So this makes sense when you're a kid, and even makes sense as you enter into teen years that you're adopting these beliefs. And we know this. We hear this story all the time. This is very much where I was when I was in college. I grew up, my last name's Dove, and I only have older siblings, and I only knew my identity as a Dove. I believed totally what my parents believed and what my siblings believed. Like, I didn't know myself separate from those who had gone before me in my family. So I very much was in a state of foreclosure when I first got to college. And I think if we model like good belief and behavior systems, that's not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with that, except as students get older, if we're only doing what our parents did or what other adults in our life did, and we don't have the deep roots of why we're believing what we're believing, when times get hard, we're not going to have something to stand on. And so that's why it's really important for us to walk alongside students to help them get to that next stage. The other thing is that if they're really bound to us and bound to the adults in their life and what they believe, there's a potential for kind of stifling the gifts that God has given these students. Because if they're bound to, and just kind of the passions and the contributions that God has planned for them to make here on this earth, if an individual continues to just mimic the actions of mom and dad, then or whoever the authority figure is, there's a chance that they'll miss the opportunity to truly live out what it looks like to use their gifts that God has given them. So, with all that said, my challenge is for us to help students move along to what's called the state of achievement. There's a state in between called moratorium, which isn't a bad place, and that's basically where they adopt their own identity and beliefs. I think it's a weird word to use, but whatever. But it's where they adopt their own identity and beliefs, but don't have any reason for adopting those. But then the state of achievement is, okay, like I know I'm believing what I'm believing. And that's what I think our goal is, to walk that process with them. So how do we do that? I think there's a couple of key tangible ways. One, and this will come up a lot today, ask questions. Instead of telling your kids or your students or whatever the case may be who you're interacting with, what you think they should believe or do, ask probing questions that leads them to that discovery on their own so they can own it. Ask them how they think that God is present in a situation. Help them to get to that place. And then I would say, secondly, open their eyes to how you see God shaping them. I think sometimes, and it's especially true when we're younger, like it's hard for us to see how God is at work in our lives. And so I would encourage you to talk to students about how you see God working and shaping their lives. Prayerfully speak truth into their life, pointing out where you see God at work. Serve as a tour guide. And I love this image. Here's a key image for you. If I were to hire a tour, let's say I want to go to France, because I love France. So if I were to hire a tour guide for France, for a part of France I've not been to, and they show up in my house with like all these photo albums, and they're like, you don't need to go. I've got all my pictures from being there. Let me tell you all about it. Well, they're not a really good tour guide. They're telling me their story, and so I'll get to hear pieces of it, but they're not really helping me on my journey because I want to go to France. But if they show up at my house and say, here are your plane tickets, have fun, they're not really a good tour guide because they're just kind of releasing me with no guidance, with nothing. That's not being a guide in the tour guide word. So to be a tour guide is to walk alongside. It's to allow someone to have their own experience, but to walk alongside of them while they're experiencing it. So part of opening someone's eyes to how God is shaping them is saying, hey, this is what I see. Let me walk alongside you as you figure this out. And then finally, and this is a key one, especially if you're a parent, I would encourage us, create it, but even as a church, create a safe place for your kids to doubt and to voice their doubts and to ask questions about their doubts, especially their faith doubts. One of the saddest experiences, if not the saddest experience I've had working with college students was a student of mine at Wheaton, who was an international student whose parents were pastors, and when he was getting ready to come to college, just really experienced a lot of deep doubt about his faith, and was really wrestling because he was going to Christian school, and expressed that to his parents. And instead of kind of embracing that and creating that space for him, their response was one of, as long as you're doubting, as long as your faith is not where we want it to be, you're not really welcome in our home. That's extreme, I realize, but that was his story. And so he had not seen his parents in 4 years. I had him, part of how we interacted, he got in a lot of trouble, and so that was kind of how our relationship started. But over time, his story came out. He had not seen his parents in 4 years. I cannot tell you how brokenhearted I was on his graduation day when all these other parents are helping their kids move out of their apartments. And there he is packing up on his own with no one there to support him. But the thing that made me the saddest wasn't even that. It's that he still was in a state of foreclosure because he had taken those doubts, and because his parents, he knew he did not want what his parents had. So it was almost an opposite state of foreclosure, but he had completely become an atheist, didn't believe in God or anything, because the only God he knew was what his parents had said to him. So if you asked him why, he couldn't tell you that there was rooted study or anything like that for his beliefs. It was entirely based on, I don't want to believe what my parents believe. And so I just would ask you and plead with you to always create a safe place for your kids to wrestle through their struggles. Now, I know this won't be easy, and again, I come back to the fact I'm not a parent, and so I know that there are certain aspects of this that I can't understand. But at the end of the day, I do think that we all desire for our kids to be rooted in Christ and to have their identity grounded entirely in Him. Or else, we wouldn't be here. So walking alongside of them through that identity discovery process is key. Now, the second area I want us to take a look at is helping kids through kind of the vocational journey. And I think this is one of the places where students get hung up the most. So we'll ask a question. How many of you, when you were kids, knew exactly what you wanted to be when you grew up? What do you want to be? What did you want to be? Do you still want to be it?
I wanted to be an actor. I don't want to be that anymore.
You don't want to be that anymore. Okay. Anybody else knew what they want to be when they grew up? I want to be a teacher. Okay. And I shared with the earlier group, I only have older siblings. They're all boys. No one ever wanted to play school with me, so I played school by myself all the time. But I would also leave notes for the Tooth Fairy to please bring me workbooks instead of money, because that was what I wanted to be. In the 6th grade, I went through a stint where I wanted to be a fighter pilot because Top Gun came out, and I thought I would go to school with all of them, and then I realized they were actors, and so that it wasn't real, and I went back to wanting to be a teacher. But my greatest passion has always been to teach. Now, am I teaching? Well, yes, in some aspects, but am I teaching elementary or history, which is what I thought I would do? No. I think it's important to pay attention to what we want to do when we're young, but part of why I brought that up is that the vocational calling journey is about so much more than just that one thing that we tend to fixate on and that we tend to think that we need to know from day one. I would encourage you, to really think about the question, what is your kid passionate about? Or what are the students that you know? What are they passionate about? Not what do you want them to do, or not even what would be the most profitable career, but what are they passionate about? What have you watched them do since they were a small child that to this day still puts a smile on their face? And I feel like we can miss the mark on this because, and I'm talking to myself as much as anyone else, I watch this happen in my own life every now and then when I think to myself and say out loud, you're 38 years old and you live on a college campus. your friends are vice presidents, or your friends have their PhDs or are doing all these things, and you live on a college campus. But then I come back to, there's so much more than what kind of society says vocation and calling is. I've watched it happen in the lives of my students too, with their parents and their mentors, myself included, who push them in a direction that might run counter to their deepest passion or their deepest desire or God's purpose for them, because it's a direction that by the worldly standards would be safe and provide long-term safety and security. Now, I'm not saying that, in order to pursue God's vocational calling, we have to always be walking in a line of danger. Nor am I saying that we always get to choose kind of that career that is, I right now am working a career that is what I feel like I was made to do. But I don't believe that always happens. What I'm saying is this, that I think we need to reframe completely the way we look at vocation and calling, especially when it comes to those who are first entering into this journey. I think we have to be very careful with how we articulate this process to them. Have any of you guys seen the movie Hugo? Hugo's a good movie. The basic premise, for those who haven't seen it, Hugo is an orphan. He's trying to find out some answers about who his dad was, but he's also trying to discover the purpose of life. And so there's a great quote in there. He's standing on the clock tower, and he's talking to his friend. And he says that if we're up to him, he'd imagine the whole world was one big machine. Machines never come up with any extra parts, They always come with the exact amount they need. So I figured if the entire world was one big machine, I couldn't be an extra part. I had to be here for some reason. And that means you have to be here for some reason too. So as the body of Christ, this isn't Hugo, this is me. As the body of Christ, we're all here for a reason. We all have a purpose. But later on in the movie, Hugo goes on to say, maybe that's why a broken machine always makes me a little sad, because it isn't able to do what it was meant to do. Maybe it's the same with people. If you lose your purpose, it's like you're broken. Hugo wanted to make a difference. He wanted people to find their purpose. And I think that's what God's calling us to do too. He's calling us to help our kids find their purpose as they enter into adulthood. I think sometimes we think of vocation solely as a job. And so when we talk to our kids about their vocation, we place them into a box that's job or career specific, doctor, actor, whatever the case might be. But vocation runs so much deeper than that, and I think it's our responsibility to help our loved ones to see that truth. Vocational discernment in the life of the Christian focuses on two things: a deepening awareness of God's kingdom purposes, and the ability to choose a calling that fits within those purposes. So like Paul says in Ephesians 2:10, he says, we are God's masterpiece. He has created us anew in Christ Jesus so that we can do the good things that he has planned for us to do long ago. So when we understand and then in turn explain vocation with this in mind, there's great freedom in the life of the individual. Because here's what happens as a result of that. There's freedom to explore the passions of childhood if you want to. There's freedom to explore the gifts that we think God has given us. And then there's even freedom to fully enjoy the job that might seem mundane, the job that might seem to other people, why would you want to do that with your life? But there's freedom to fully enjoy that when God is the focus of our vocational calling. We are God's masterpiece, and he has planned for us to do good things, living out God's kingdom purposes. I have had this conversation with so many students over the last 4 years. Usually it's second semester, senior year, around April, and they're trying to find a job. And they're kind of freaking out because not only are they trying to find a job, but oftentimes they think that whatever they find, and I was the student, they think whatever they find is what they have to do forever. And so there's this total panic moment. But I'll tell you, there is great beauty in the aha moment when students realize they don't need to know what they were going to do with the rest of their life on the day that they graduate. But sometimes following God's will just means simply being faithful to whatever he is putting in front of you today. And it means seeing his purposes and choosing to do something that fits with those purposes. So I'm so grateful for those mentors in my life who've taught me that, both when I was in college and beyond. God used them to regularly remind me A, that I was not defined by my job status, B, that what I was doing mattered to God's greater purpose, and C, that the greater call was to be faithful with whatever I was doing in the moment. And so that's what I'm challenging you guys to do today, I mean all of us to do, as we walk alongside students. That as we prepare them for their life ahead, I want us to encourage them to do two things, okay? So here are our two tangibles. One, be eyes for your children to help them discover their passions. And then encourage those passions. Encourage the passions of childhood, but while at the same time asking questions that can lead to vocational discovery surrounding those passions. Part of why I think we don't necessarily do what we think we're going to do when we grow up is there's so much more to the world than just doing that one specific job. There's so many more ways that the things that get us, I was excited about teaching. I thought that meant I had to be a teacher in a classroom of an elementary school. Well, that's not what I had to do at all. I am teaching now, but I'm teaching in a completely different way. And so I think part of what we get to do is to help open eyes to how this can play out, how loves and passions can play out in so many different ways. God has gifted your child for a reason, so don't stifle those gifts just because it's something that you want for your kid. I hesitate to say that, but similar to my students whose parents did not create a safe place, I've had some students who are entirely doing jobs solely because it's what mom and dad have asked them to do, or because they've not had the conversation with mom and dad saying they don't want to do that or they're not interested in that, so they feel for whatever reason a pressure that this is what mom and dad want me to do. I had a student again at Wheaton who got to meet with me because she had been drinking, which was not allowed. Or I had heard that she'd been drinking, so I asked her about it, and she confessed immediately. But as we dug deeper, I found out the story, because I always ask, okay, why, what led you to this, that sort of thing. She was second semester senior, pre-med, smart as all get out. Well, not streets, well, you'll hear that in a minute. But she's smart in the classroom, but she had zero desire to be a doctor. No desire to be a doctor. But that was what her parents wanted for her. So, and this is where the non-smart came in, she drank in the hopes of getting caught and potentially getting kicked out because she saw that as her way out without disappointing her parents by telling them she didn't want to be a doctor. So not a lot of logic on that front, but her logic was skewed. But I honestly don't believe, I've met her parents, and I don't believe that any parent at the core of their being, what they want for their child is to choose a vocation solely to please them. But I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen a lot, time and time again. So my thing for you is to have conversations with kids, whether it's they're 10, 15, whatever age, and talk to them about what makes them excited and see how that fits into God's purposes. Walk the journey with them of helping them to find an internship or, exploring different career paths with what they enjoy doing. But allow it to be their vocational pursuit, but walk the journey with them. But then the second piece, so you've got that extreme of let them be interested in something, but then the second piece is encourage them to do something, okay? Sometimes in an attempt to not pressure, and out of, we want our kids to know that we love them, but we choose to not ask the questions or take any sort of time with them to help them on the discovery process. So we remain hands-off to a point of kind of just implying a distance, and just leave all the steps of the process to them. And that, too, can be detrimental at times. Here's an example I'll give. When I said earlier that I could write a book, I think this story would be either my opener or my closer, because it's one of my favorite stories from this journey I've been on. I had a student who was one of my favorite students, if we're allowed to have favorite students, at Wheaton, whose name was Stephen. And he loves that I tell this story, because it's a funny story. And I'd met him a few times, but to give you a picture, Stephen is like the definition of laid back. If you looked up laid back in the dictionary, Stephen would be there on his roller skates, because Stephen roller skated everywhere. Not roller bladed, he roller skated everywhere. But he was so laid back. So we met a few times, but we never had a long conversation at this point. And one night it was about 11 o'clock, and I was asleep, and I wasn't on duty, and there was a note on my board as far as who was on duty, and there was a knock on my door. And I just rolled over, because I was like, you know what, they'll be able to see who's on duty. They can go find them to get let into their apartment or whatever. But then the knock became a little bit more insistent. So I got up and went and opened it, and Stephen was there, and this is how the conversation went. I said, hey, Stephen. He said, hey, Kristal. I said, what's up, bud? I said, well, we kind of have a problem in our apartment. I said, well, what's going on? He said, well, it's kind of on fire. I it's like, so I'm standing there because I'm half asleep. I said, Stephen, what do you mean it's kind of on fire? He's like, yeah, there's flames and stuff. At which point I'm like, my eyes wide open because I don't know why the alarms are going off. And I said, Stephen, go pull the alarm, which is right outside their apartment. And he said, am I allowed to? I thought you get in trouble for that. I was like, not when there's a fire. And at that point, the alarm started going off. And, I can tell that story because everybody was okay. And although there was damage, it was not extensive. And it's very, to give you just even a bit more picture of him, the conversation that had happened prior to him arriving at my door was they had a grease fire because they had a grease fire because of some things they'd done. And the conversation that happened is, well, what should we do? Should we throw a bucket of water on it? Which, thank goodness, they did not. And someone else said, we should probably go ask Kristal. Because that's the knowledge that comes with being in Rest Life, is exactly how to be a fireman. So anyway, so that gives you a picture of Stephen. And why I share that is because I love him. I love this kid. But unfortunately, many of the adults in his life who also just adored him and love his laid-back nature had never really encouraged him into any form of discussion about his future, about God's purposes for his life, anything. So when he graduated from college, he was a geology major, graduated from college with zero knowledge of anything that he might want to do, because no one had ever had any sort of conversation with him about it. And the last I talked to him, he was kind of hopping from apartment to apartment in downtown Chicago, somehow making ends meet, but was feeling really directionless and was starting to kind of say, hey, wait a minute, why am I not doing anything? I realize part of releasing your kids is letting them make their own choices. And at the end of the day, Stephen's making his own choices. But from a very young age, he was released to do whatever he wanted. The more I found out about family, he was released to do whatever he wanted, to make his own choices. And no one had really taken the time to probe into his life. So when it comes to your kids, hold on to the vocational quest loosely, but at the same time, encourage there to be a quest. The final area that I would like to explore is mentoring. I'm assuming everybody in here has had a mentor at some point. What are characteristics of a good mentor?
Resourceful.
Resourceful, very good. Anything else? You're grinning like you want to say something.
Wise.
Wise.
Thanks, that's what I was going to say.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Well, I think for me, probably the thing that stands out to the most to me of those who've played the most significant role in my life is the way in which they modeled what they taught, but also the way in which they invited me in to their life to be an active participant. So it wasn't just the sitting down for a meeting, but more that I was invited into someone's life. And I think that is one of the most significant tasks that God is putting before us, whether we're a parent or a youth sponsor or, a student who is mentoring a younger child than us. I think it's never too early to start mentoring someone, but that we should serve as engaged mentors. As I've mentioned before, God is calling us to walk alongside our loved ones, patiently opening their eyes to how God's calling them to live their lives. So if you're a parent, I don't know, but there's probably a bit of it that to see yourself as a mentor to your child can be weird. And I do think that we're called to have, and I'll talk about this in a little bit, that we need to encourage students to have mentors outside of the home. But as a parent, I think there are some key characteristics to mentoring that your kids need to see in you. And one of those, which is something that I've already talked about a little bit, is to engage your kids in conversation about the things that matter. Unfortunately, there are a lot of cultural constructs today that I think can hinder this endeavor. One of the things, family meals around the table don't happen nearly as much as they used to. And even when things do happen, technology is such, and I love technology, let's be clear, let me put the blanket statement, but technology is such a key part of our lives that although we're in one space together, we might not all be connected with one another. So I think that it's important for us to be intentional in modeling to our kids and walking alongside and mentoring to them how to overcome these obstacles versus allowing them to define us. It can be, I've heard a lot of parents say, well, my kids don't really want to talk to me, or they don't really want to let me in to what is going on. And you know what, that does happen. But I think that we have the ability to push through that. And I've learned that this year. I'm doing something at Milligan called a Living and Learning Community, and so I have 10 students over for dinner on Sunday nights as a part of that. There's a couple components to it, but one of the things is we do dinner from 5 to 6 every Sunday night. TV goes off, which drives the guys crazy because it's like heart of football time. Cell phones are supposed to be off. And it's very funny because they've gotten to, Kristal, can I please, I have to do this for my job real quick. You know, they ask permission now to turn on their phone real quick. But cell phones are supposed to be off. And it was hysterical because the very first week, it was like an awkward hour because no one really knew each other well. They really didn't know me, and deep conversation was, you know, meh, it was just bizarre. And they were out the door like as 6 o'clock, you know, they could see the clock and they were out the door at 6. But here's what I've noticed, you know, we're 5 weeks in now or whatever, and as the weeks have progressed, the conversations have gotten so much deeper. And this past week, because we're forced, for an hour, we sit and converse over dinner. And this past week, the question was, can we just come over here for all of Sunday? And I was like, well, no, probably not, but I love that you love being over here. And they don't leave now till 7 or what, you know, they just kind of hang around, which I absolutely love. But it takes time. And I think we need to be very intentional to push through versus just accepting culture saying, hey, our kids don't want to hang out with us, or whatever the space might be. And I think the more times you create space for honest conversation or for rich conversation, the more honest that they're going to be with you. And then the other thing that I would say when it comes to serving as a mentor to your kids, and for anyone for that matter, is to learn to listen. I think listening is one of those skills that is hard. I'm a talker, so listening is hard, but it is also one of those things that is needed more than anything else in this world. I grew up in a wonderful Christian home, but I was the youngest of 5 kids, so I don't think I ever really felt that heard, and I'm sure I was, but I never felt heard because it was kind of always a competition of who could get in the last word. And I think that's why some of the people who have had the greatest influence on my life are those who have been willing to just simply listen to me, those who let me talk sometimes for about 10 straight minutes without stopping, but no interruptions and no attempts at fixing within the moment, but just willing to listen in the middle, processing. They'll ask questions and provide wise counsel as the conversation progresses, but they just simply listen. As an adult, when I've had these conversations with people, I tend to preface them with, okay, I'm going to talk, and I hope that and don't say anything until I'm finished. Just let me talk it out. But the thing is, our students won't always ask that. Your kids won't always ask that. But here's the thing, they need that from you. They need you to just sit there and listen. So part of what I'm doing here is I'm asking you for them. If you want to effectively launch your kids into adulthood, be willing to listen to them. Now, I mentioned a few minutes ago the importance of allowing your kids to have mentors outside of the home. Just kind of that other individual who is pouring into your student's life. And for those of you here who are that person, thanks for what you do, because that is just such a key role. But parents, I want to encourage you to be intentional about finding mentors for your kids. Be intentional about finding mentors. Some of it will happen naturally. They'll have a teacher, they'll have a youth sponsor, you know, whoever it might be. But that doesn't always happen naturally. So I want to encourage you to be intentional. It could be somebody you work with. It could be somebody that you know, it could be a family member, whatever the case might be, but be intentional about providing your kids with the opportunities to have a mentor. Now, I'm grateful to my parents for a lot of things. I was raised in a wonderful Christian home, and I am just so grateful. But probably the thing that I'm most thankful for is that they lived out this mentoring piece very, very well. My mom and dad were both teachers and coaches, and so as a result, it kind of took a village to raise us, because they were often, you know, on buses with basketball teams or whatever the case might be. And so there were other teachers and that were always hauling us all over the place, and I, you know, would show up. I never knew who was taking me to be with my mom and dad, that it was just good family friends that would show up at our house. My parents very much modeled this, and it started at a young age for me and my brothers and stayed that way the whole way through. But I would say the first person that really served as a solid mentor for me was a guy by the name of Peter. who taught with my dad. And my dad was very intentional about mentoring Peter. Peter was a young teacher when he first started working there, and he coached with my dad, and my dad was very intentional about mentoring and investing in Peter. And in turn, Peter became very intentional about mentoring and investing in me. Serving like another big brother, because 4 wasn't enough, God threw Peter into my life. It wasn't a structured mentorship, but rather was just something that we lived out on a daily basis. And part of what I share about Peter is when one evening during my sophomore year in college, Peter was over at our house, as he often was, having dinner, and my foster brother, who was just really... he had struggled with a lot of things, and at the end of dinner, things in my home became a bit crazy, and Tommy had been living with us for 8 years at that point, and that night, he just made it very clear that he ran away that evening at the end of dinner, and it looked like he was probably going to try to take his life. And so my parents quickly entered into stuff with the police and, very much jumped into looking for Tom and caring for Tommy. And Peter stepped in to care for me, walking alongside of me not only that night, but this was a long process for my family. So in the months ahead, very much walking alongside of me, listening to me, hearing me out, but also inviting me into his life, because he had a sister who had struggled with mental illness as well. And so very much opening up that spot in his life for me as I went on that journey. So I feel like his care for me during those years was instrumental in me being where I am today, and that would not have happened if my parents had not invited him into that place and allowed him to enter into that place. So I just want to encourage you, if you're a parent, invite mentors into the lives of your kids. So there you have it, identity formation, vocation, and mentoring. We have a few minutes left, and one of the things that I said at the outset with me not being a parent is I don't know what it's like, but I have friends who do, because they're parents of emerging adults, 21-year-old and 24-year-old men, who I am actually, Bill and Dwinegreer, I'm going to invite them up and just ask them some questions, because they can kind of show you practically how this is played out, the stuff is played out in their lives as they have parented. So, talk through some stuff with them. Hey, thanks guys for being here. So one of the things that we talked about was just kind of the identity formation thing, and just the foreclosure where kids adopt everything that their parents do, to then moving forward into a state of achievement. And I say your boys would very much be at a state now where they have their own beliefs and they're grounded in those beliefs. What are some of the things that you all did, whether it be intentional or unintentional, that kind of has helped to get them to that place today?
I'll start off.
You start.
I think one of the things we have done and did early on, and like I say, some of it's probably unintentional, some's intentional, but is the modeling piece. Is try to be who you want them to be, to have the values, live the values that you feel, so that they will see those through their life. And I always felt like, being close to God and being active in your church were top priorities no matter what. And I wanted them to feel that and to see that in us, so that when they were out on their own, that would just be how they would want to live, and they would assume that as their priority in life. And when the kids are busy and they're growing up, sometimes you're tired. Sometimes you just don't want to do it. But I would think, it doesn't really matter. That's my priority, no matter how I feel, and I want them to see that. I want that to be where I am, where my focus is. So, sort of unintentional, because that was the way I was, but sort of intentional, because sometimes you had to, kind of push into that.
And they very much adopted it now as this is a part of who they are.
And that's what I saw my parents do. That's probably what you saw your parents do. It wasn't necessarily intentional, sit down and let's converse about how important this is. It just is.
Yeah.
This is what they did.
From the modeling piece.
And I think both of our parents were that way, which was natural for us. Which worked out well.
We never discussed on Sunday morning.
Yeah, whether or not you just did it. It's what you did.
And it didn't matter if you were out till 2 o'clock in the morning on a band trip. You were going to get up and go, because that was where you needed to be. And you all needed to be there as a family together. You didn't leave one of you home.
Yep.
You all went.
Well, let me ask you this then, because it's, with that, there's a bit of, I would guess that I mean, and maybe you knew that your boys were going to adopt this stuff easily, but as they've entered into college and that sort of thing, was there any fear in releasing them to make their own choices when it came to this stuff?
I can't say that I've ever really felt fear, but there's always anxiety that they're, are they going to make the right decisions and make the best decisions? But I guess I've approached parenthood with a fair bit of faith that if I could make it to adulthood,
They could too.
surely they could.
Well, let's talk some about the kind of the vocational piece. With your boys, you very much released them to decide what they wanted to study and do, but what were some of the questions, or just kind of how did you, with have very distinct things that they are doing or want to do, what was, how did they get to that place, and how did you kind of walk to that place with them?
Well, with our oldest, he is me, remade in some ways. So I kind of felt like I knew where he would be happy, where he would feel satisfied, what he would be drawn to, which was not the path he was on. But it was his path. He needed to study and major and do what he thought he wanted to do. And in his senior year, in March, I guess it was, as I was about to order graduation, he said, I really am not enjoying what I'm studying. And we'd encouraged him to do an internship to get a feel for what it was like, and he had done that. And he said, no, I really don't see me doing that, this internship. I don't like what I'm seeing. He said, I really think I would like to major in something else. And so instead of saying, it's March, your senior year, you can't do that, I felt like this is the time if you see something else you want to do. And of course he wanted to do accounting, which is what I thought early on that he should do, so I felt justified, vindicated, but it was his choice. We let him make that choice, and we stood behind him and said, don't graduate then, go ahead. If you need another year, study another year, and go down the route that you want to pursue. Be supportive of that, instead of trying to say you've gone too far, you can't do something different. But he had to make that decision on his own.
Yeah,
If we had said this is what you need to major in from day one, he wouldn't have been happy. But he found it on his own, luckily before he graduated. And who knows where that path may take him, though it still may take him a different route down the road. But
Well, that's one thing we try to convey to both our kids, and their younger one is very, very long-term, goal-oriented. He's established years ago what his career path was going to be, and he
Stuck with it.
stuck with it. That's the other child. But we've always indicated to them and reassured them that their life could take many turns. And I mean our own, mine particularly career-wise, changed multiple times. But I'm used to that as well in my professional role as having been a professor and a college administrator in counseling kids going through career choices and trying to discern God's call for their life. That what you need to be prepared for is for life, not just for a career.
No, and that's such a good word too, as far as even just making sure parents hear that a part of because there's going to be kids who have no clue what they want to do, and so helping them to get to the place of what do I want my life to look like.
And I mean, I try to go down and meet with prospective students when they come to Milligan, just to greet them and welcome them and meet the parents. And I'll often ask them, what are you planning to study? What are you thinking about? And some have a laser beam answer, laser beam focus, and others have no clue. And both are okay.
and some their
okay.
parents tell you what they're
Yeah, yeah.
Kid doesn't answer, but the parent does, and I know that that's probably the problem.
But even our youngest, with his focus on what he wanted to do, he still needed to be encouraged at times. There were times when it was difficult, and he would see the easier path. Maybe all my friends are doing this, and it's really easy, and so maybe I want to take a different route. But just to talk to him about it, where is your passion? What do you really want to do? And what's maybe making you think about a different path? Is it because your passion is going that way, or are you just discouraged at the moment? To see where he was.
But again, we have two very different kind of kids.
Yeah.
We did.
And it's very easy to listen to the younger one because he talks. The older one doesn't talk hardly at all. So it's much more difficult to have that kind of conversation.
To get there.
But it just takes a different approach.
Well, let's talk, so mentoring. your boys have had wonderful mentors. What was that like for you? Was it hard to kind of release them into the care of mentors and just kind of, I know you've been lucky with having great ones through church and that sort of thing. And so talk what that was like and kind of the fruits that you've seen in their life as a result of them having good mentors.
Well, like you said, I think we've been very fortunate because we have had outstanding mentors at church, and they've been consistent mentors in their lives that, we didn't have a revolving door of youth leaders or youth ministers. We had people that were there with them through their whole time and, come to their events, we come to ball games and band events, and, we're just so supportive of them, but we're such great people that, to me, I had no concern at all of putting them in their hands. But I knew the values they held. But we were fortunate we didn't have to seek out those mentors. They were just there.
And in some ways, the boys sought them out. They naturally gravitated to people they were comfortable with, that they could look up to, and whose opinions and perspectives they appreciated. And I'm grateful that they were able to discern that on their own.
Good, and having good ones, yeah. What was it like for you all? You've worked with college students for many years now, long time. So you've mentored a lot of students also. So, and I think one of the things I didn't mention when I was up there, but I think it's very important, is even as parents of kids, that it's important for your kids to see you mentoring others as well. But there can be some dangers with that, so or things you just need to be cautious of. So what was that? Because you've had a revolving door of students over the years. What has been that been like for you guys?
Well, the one thing I would say is that, we have always had students in our home and spent time with them, and I guess danger, the one thing I always felt like I really wanted to be involved and get to know the students and want them to know that we cared, but not at the cost of our own kids, thinking, the tables have turned.
We love them more.
We're not going to be at your stuff because we're going to be there. So you had to balance that out. But a lot of times our kids were with us and with the other students, and I thought that was good for them too, to have that exposure to the college students as they were growing up.
I think a lot of our students, Milligan students, have been mentors for our kids. I just posted how proud we are of our son being accepted in med school this week, and I have had, of all of the posts and all the comments, 4 or 5 of them are from people who babysat our kids. And we're commenting about how grown up they were in the picture that I shared. And that is just awesome to be able to, that they're still following, they're still tracking, they're still watching those kids and proud of how they have grown up. So it's been a great situation, really.
And I've appreciated the fact that we've been able to be involved with the college students from when our kids were earlier, just to see what a college student's capable of, what their abilities are. Because with your own kids, it's so easy to think they're little kids when they're in college and to forget what they might be capable of. But being exposed to that so much, I think it made us see them more in the age bracket and the abilities that they had. Then, well, you can't do that. I was telling earlier that our oldest son went on the humanities trip with Milligan when he was, I guess, his sophomore and junior year. He's very quiet, as he says. He doesn't talk a lot, very shy, just reserved. He lost or got stolen his passport Friday night before they were to fly out Sunday morning. Well, he couldn't come home with the group because you can't get his temporary passport on the weekend, so he had to stay behind by himself, get to the embassy Monday, get his passport, and fly home Tuesday. First instinct as a parent is, I'm on the next plane over there, and I'm going to sit there with him. But I thought, you know what? We've been with college kids. We've been overseas with college kids. They're capable. We've seen how they know how to get around. They know how to take the taxi, how to ride the train. They know how to navigate the airports. He can do this. He can do this. So we called him a whole lot, but he did it. He did it on his own. And when he got off the plane in Charlotte, we went to pick him up. He got off. He said, "You know what? I could do anything I wanted, couldn't I? I really can do anything." And it was just such a great experience for him to have done it on his own. Or if we had hopped on a plane and gone over there to be with him, self-confidence would have been there. But I don't know that I would have had the nerve had I not been exposed to the college kids more and to seeing what they really can do.
I said, even if the lady at the hotel did tell me, you call too much. During
That's
that
great.
gap while we were checking in.
He was in Athens, Greece.
You call too much.
Tennessee, you're like, I call a lot.
I just asked for his room one too many times. You call too much.
That's awesome.
It's not your son. Nobody asked for it.
So leave me alone. Well, thank you all very, very much for that. And we're going to close, but the one thing I would say, and I think it sticks out when you guys, specifically when you all were talking about the boys and their vocational thing, is, their vocational journey. I kind of gave some blanket stuff here, but the reality is at the end of the day, each child is unique. Every student that you work with is unique. I have 160 students under my care in Res Life, and none of them are alike. Every conversation I have is individualized based on what that student's going through. And so, although we can say all these things, I think it's important to remember that God has uniquely wired the ones that you care about, and to remember that always as you're entering into this with them. And then the last thing I would say is this: at the end of the day, they're God's. And so as I lose a lot of sleep over my students. I really do, because I know what they're going through. I know what situations they're in. But at the end of the day, when I lay my head on the pillow, what I have to do and what I remind myself of consistently is to just leave them in God's hands, because He has them. And so I would just encourage you to do that. So thank you guys. You've been wonderful. Appreciate you. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks, friends.